Hello, welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Canton.
I'm Dave Higgins.
And I'm Ed Sullivan.
And today we're going to be talking about outlining because Ed has a new outlining method he wants to run by us. But before we do that, we'll do our weekly roundup. And Dave, since you're furthest on the left, do you want to go first?
Okay. Another episode of Seven Stones, outlined, written, polished, and published. So that's traditional stuff. In terms of odd stuff I've done this week, finished doing the print inners for Origin and Adventure, the first two books in the Dragons and Magic series that I'm writing with Simon. So those have gone to Create Space, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we're going to get the okay from Create Space. They don't have any trouble with the print interiors, that the covers that fit their specifications exactly don't fit the other specifications that they haven't mentioned, and we'll actually be able to get those ready to publish well ahead of when we want them up there. So that's me for the week.
Ed, do you want to go next?
Sure. Stuff around the house, regular life stuff. Haven't written many words, but did restructure my timetable for what I'm going to do. I actually tried to plan out all the way till almost August of 2017, putting priority on the things that I have started and are deep into and haven't finished. Trying to finish in October. I'm 25,000 words into a science fiction POW war story that I'm co-authoring with someone I haven't talked about much yet. I have a fellow named John Rose, who lives in Wisconsin. He does all the covers for Cheap Jack Pulp, and he's the other senior editor that I brought on board. And he and I did the beats and the outlining, and I'm writing the first draft. So I'm going to try and finish that, and then finish the space western with the female robot cowboy for November, and then start a new project, first draft for December. And then my plan is to knock off second drafts and third drafts at different points, and have that all wrapped up by April, May, and then use the remaining time between then and August to get the first draft and second draft of a sequel to Sixteen Queen done, so that I can properly market that series and not just have one outlying book sitting out there doing much of nothing. So
That's a lot.
Yeah, and if I do 50% of it, I'll be happy.
As for me, I have done zero writing this week. I did do a very quick job on the print covers for two of the Dragons and Magic series, but that was just taking the front cover we'd gotten off a graphic designer and then putting a wraparound, which was just a plain redstone wraparound with some the text, the blurb on the back. Otherwise, I've just been working on the app, testing it like absolute crazy because I want it to be. So I've had a first version that kind of worked, but was written in an old-fashioned programming language. So I rewrote the entire thing. This was in April. I rewrote the entire thing into a modern programming language for July, I think, and that had loads of bugs. So I've annoyed my readers twice with this thing. So I reckon this was kind of the last chance. If it didn't work now, then even my most loyal readers were going to go, listen, we can't read on this crappy thing. So I spent an entire week testing it on everything I could get my hands on. So even reading it on your phone in landscape kind of works. I mean, it's not ideal, but you can hold it like that and it adjusts the text to fit the screen, and you can press next buttons and things like that.
Not bad.
So yeah, that was a lot of work. The problem with it is that's the most complicated screen you can possibly make on a web browser, because it's not designed for that kind of thing. And I did that first. And I had to do all the other stuff, like login pages, registration pages, all that kind of stuff as well, just to get it ready. So
I couldn't have done it.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying to a guy in work that, so I learned JavaScript and all that kind of stuff just for this. And it's kind of, programming is kind of about the fundamentals. Once you learn the fundamentals, it doesn't matter what the language is. You can kind of shift over, but the fundamentals take a while to get a hang of. So anyway, yeah, that's not writing related really. My hope, I remember I said in August, oh, there's just another month and then I'll be letting other authors get into the system. That was completely optimistic and silly. My hope is that I can get the framework stuff done by the end of this month, maybe the start of November. And then that's like adding a book and editing a book and all that kind of stuff. When those are done, then I'm going to invite in people kind of in the inner circle. Maybe Ed and Dave will get a invite to join. And then they can kind of test and let me know what's wrong. And after that, maybe I'll start letting people in. So it could be next year, January maybe, or something like that, by the time most people can get in. But as I was mentioning before the podcast, I'm wondering whether, so my view on this system is that it'll help you to write more books, better books, and more profitable books. That's kind of the goal. So I'm wondering if I can take Shiny New Swindle, for instance, which makes no money at all, and make it into not necessarily a blockbuster success, but at least something that sells some copies. And if I can do that, that's kind of a proof of concept, like okay, well, this kind of works. So I don't want to sell anything that doesn't work or I don't believe in. So I want to prove that it works first before I start telling other authors, oh, jump in this is definitely going to work. And the other thing I wanted to mention was I've noticed that you get like Nick Stevenson has his method. So he sold it to loads of people, and it doesn't work as well. Mark Dawson's the same. I want to make a system where people who aren't marketers can come up with their own marketing strategy that works, that's more individual for them. So rather than thousands of authors all doing the same thing and then it stops working because we're all doing the same thing, that people can through trial and error come up with their own approach and keep it to themselves or tell their friends or whatever it happens to be, or even sell it if they want to. And then, you know, that it keeps working because there isn't every author in the world doing it. It's just them with their approach, and it's something that works. Mm-hmm. So that's my goal. It's kind of a lofty goal, but anyway, that wasn't really, it's vaguely writing related, I guess.
It is. I think it is. It is.
So, and it all comes out of my frustration of not being good at marketing, so not knowing what works, and trial and error is not easy as it's structured now. But we should probably hop on to our topic, which is outlining. Do you want to take the lead, Ed, since you've got your document?
I'll do a screen share. There we. Is that up?
Yep.
Okay, so there's a few different fellows. What was the name you had? It was
Dan Wells.
Dan Wells, and there's another fellow that I got. He was more on the screenplay side, but it's a very common basic setup with the 60 beats, which is very oddly enough. You've got 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. 60 is supposed to be a decent pulse. So there's some magic in the number 60. So what I did is I took the 60 boxes, and then the words are actually where he suggested for the most part on the screenwriters thing, but I've expanded it to kind of make it for dummies, and when I say dummies, I mean me. Basically, when I'm doing my beats, if the opening and the hook hasn't occurred in the first 4 beats, I say you're wrong. If your plot point 1 hasn't occurred in the yellow zone, then you're wrong. The same with your pinch points. The midpoint doesn't even have a spread. The midpoint is on beat 30. So if you're not basically at your midpoint by beat 30, you should be questioning. Then, so basically it goes open in the hook, plot point 1, pinch point 1, midpoint, pinpoint 2, plot point 2. And then it gets a little complicated from there, where you should have your building action, kind of you're going into your building action on plot point 2. And then, of course, most of the general story structure, you have a false end or a false climax. Not that you really have to do that, but I find that most things usually either have the false ending of the action adventure thing where the bad guy falls off a cliff and you think it's over, and then he pulls himself back over and he has to be shot one more time, or the real ending can go there, and then you have a little wrap up for the epilogue. I did that with 16 Queen, where the ending was the big battle, but then there was more afterwards where they had to, they had to get together after the big battle and people died and close some loops through dialogue and kind of say where everybody's going. So that false end could really just be like labeled end or climax or whatever you really care to do. And this won't be for everybody, but what I find is if I take this and I don't put the words that are in there, I don't put them. I just abbreviate them with OPP, and then for pinch point, I use a little clamp that looks like a C, almost like a lesser than or greater than sign next to a P, so that it doesn't take up the whole box. And then I go through and do my beats by writing something in each box to represent my first set of beats. And it can be as simple as when I've used this to beat out a romance or an adult novel, which I've done occasionally, sometimes the box only says sex, or sometimes the box only says death, or a couple of words like minor bad guy dies, representing that this isn't your antagonist dying, but one of his henchmen, who is a named henchman or an actual character rather than just a blank face, dies. And I keep it pretty simple, and I fill the box with 3 to 5 words, and then I go through kind of snowflakey method in an expansionist way, and I'll make each box into a sentence, and then go through one more time and make each sentence into a paragraph, and then either I'll take it from there and start writing with those of my beats, or sometimes I've even gone so far as to turn each paragraph into 500 to 1,000 words. And I've only done that once or twice, because if you turn it into 500 to 1,000 words, you've basically got a novel length anyway. But I will tell you that if you turn each box into 500 or 1,000 words, in theory, I think you would end up with a great novel, because you'd be looking at 100,000 word novel, and your beat would be 1,000 words. So even if that beat of 1,000 words only gave you 500 usable words, they'd be very well thought out. So I'm just I can take that away now, or did I do it? No. There we go.
So I think there's two main arguments for, so it's mostly like outlining versus pantsing.
Right.
And there's two main arguments, and the argument for outlining is, as you say, that things match the story structure that people prefer to read. So there's some argument about, it's very formulaic or whatever, but every hit movie, everything always matches the same structure. There is something built into us as humans that likes that story structure. So there's that. But then on the pantsing side, there's the argument that you can come up with ideas that will surprise the reader that you could never think of in the outlining phase, because it requires you to get into the actual characters and into the story and the world to realize what can actually happen and what the surprise could be. So I think there's a lot to be said for both, really. Outlining, so I've used outlining extensively up until this year. And then this year I tried doing kind of halfway between the two, where I plan about 15,000 words at a time. And usually what happened when I used to outline was that I'd get to 15 to 20,000 words, and then I would realize that the characters wouldn't do what I wanted or shouldn't do what I wanted. And then I have to re-outline anyway. So I figured that I should save myself the work and just outline 15 to 20,000 words of it. After writing 3 or 4 books now with that, I reckon that it's not wasted effort outlining, because it gives you ideas that you can fall back on, that you can do better than. So if you come up with an outline and you don't use 60% of it or 70% of it or whatever it is, you still have those ideas, and those ideas are helping you flesh out the world and helping you flesh out the characters and the background to them and helping you to kind of get it all into your head. So I think that's kind of something I've been missing in the recent books. So not that the outline will remain concrete and I won't change it, but that I expect to change it, but I need to make it anyway, even if it seems like it's wasted effort. So on your outlining idea, I'd certainly think it's worthwhile.
Well, I go off the rails, which is apropos for what you just said. I outline, and then the outline goes off the rails. I mean, the thing that I said I was working on, wanted to be done this month, about 25,000 words in, it was outlined one way, and well, it was outlined and it's still kind of telling the story, but then things come about that you just couldn't foresee. Like, this was a prison camp story, and then it turned and almost became like it added a component of The Longest Yard, where in the prison camp they're playing sports, and of all things, you guys will appreciate this. I didn't want it to be, oh, they're playing football, or oh, they're playing baseball. I mean, how often? So in the prison camp, in the very far future, in a very science fiction atmosphere, basically they're hurling, because that gave a chance for a very contact sport involving sticks, and it is guards versus prisoners, and it's held sacred that you don't cheat and you don't involve yourself in the game. So guards and prisoners rough each other up, and it's okay on the field, because the game is more sacred than even to everybody than even the good order of the prison camp. Anything goes. And if you would ask me, like, going into it, like, look at your beats. Are they going to play sports? I would be like, oh, maybe. I don't think it. Are they going to be hurling? No. That was a Google search. I was like, okay, I need a sport, and then I knew of it because I've watched it, but that wouldn't have been. So that was definitely not in the beats, but it's a very intrinsic part of the middle of the story now. So there is an element, even when you outline, there's an element of pantsing that you can't help, because when you're sitting there and all of a sudden you have this great idea and you have to explore the tangent, that's pantsing.
Yeah. And I think if you would abandon that and kept yourself rigidly to the outline, I don't know, it would be a different kind of book. It's wrong to say it'd be an inferior book, I think. Like Dan Brown gets accused of that all the time, or what's his name, John Grisham,
Mm.
that their characters are just cardboard and just do what the plot says. Or there's certainly movies that are like that all the time. And I don't know, I would prefer, me personally, I would prefer something that's true to the characters and is a little, that the plot is a little different. It's still, like if you've got a boring plot, I don't think it's going to hang on to anyone, no matter what. But if it's got a very, explosion-y plot, but you don't care who gets killed or anything, that's difficult to hang on to people with as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. Far be it from me to judge my writing in this instance. I'm not going to say me, but I've read stuff from both of you, and it seems to me that both of you start with an interesting character. That at the very least, even if I'm not going to accuse you of being character-driven versus plot-driven, each of you have of what I've read, have something that's developed around a character. The character is the interesting part. I mean, so
character's the whole of reality for me.
Right.
Potentially, my books are more plot-driven than my approach to real life, because I see the world as, well, we've got imperfect senses, and we're interpreting that imperfect sense data using a mind that has a set of assumptions based on previous things that kind of worked. So for me, the real world is very much a creation of an individual character. So it seems almost backwards to me to try and start off a story with, okay, what are the events? Now we'll put some people on it, because the events are a product of people. After doing witness evidence training as part of my postgrad and seeing witnesses in court, two people who saw the same thing will tell a radically different story. So even if you start off with, okay, I've got a story idea rather than a character idea, or I've got a world idea rather than a character idea, the way I think means I can't actually just have a world and tell a story about it without having a character I know well enough to give me a viewpoint on it. Otherwise, it's just sort of a history text, and it comes out being, well, here's a list of things. And that hits me to the point that my method of outlining doesn't work very well with these formal structures where you put in, okay, we'll put in pinch points, we'll put in reversals, we'll put in false ends. Because I've tried a number of those. I always hit the fact, well, that's not how people see the world. There's got to start with the character. So I can create an outline, but I have to create an outline starting from, well, what would the characters, what starts the character's journey? An event happens to this character that causes something to happen. And then where it goes from there is them reacting to that. And then other things happen, that some as a consequence of their reaction, some as the antagonist, contagonist, whatever you want to call it, doing things. But the next thing is always coming from someone acting rather than because, oh, we're halfway through the book, so we need to have a reversal. So it's a rolling, well, what stops the antagonist, what stops the protagonist from just coasting along where they are? What makes the protagonist do something? What does the antagonist do in reaction to the protagonist's plan? So I don't know if it's, I think it might have been an outline technique that Simon showed me, where you've just got your starting point, and then under that you write an event, and then under that you write the reaction to the event, and then you put another event under it, and then another reaction. So the outline just comes out as a series of and then I, but, and then I, but. And I don't put a structure on it. Like, okay, well, we're halfway through the book, so we'll have a major disaster. We're 2/3 the way through the book, so we'll have a major disaster. We're in the last chapter, book 1, so now we'll have the hero suddenly achieving his goal through his virtue. And then we'll have the last chapter for wrap up. Because the flow of the story doesn't work for me coming from that end. Only after I've got the first draft can I go through and go, well, it takes an awfully long time to build up to this, so I'll shorten that. And he gets hit with too much there, so I'll space that out with a little bit more.
I think as well, there's like if you ask a 5-year-old to tell you a story, they put a 3-act structure into it just as a kind of a natural thing. So I think as well, as you're writing a story, even if you're pantsing it, you do kind of follow the same thing, just on a, an unconscious or semi-conscious level.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have to say, okay, this is this and this is this and whatever. You'll kind of do it anyway. Like as an example, Dave and I we planned out sorcery, and then as I was writing it, I got to a certain point and I went, well, we have all this extra stuff that's meant to come next, but it feels like now we should be going towards the finale. They've had all these setbacks, and they've got over all these setbacks. So now is where the finale comes. Like, it's just a kind of a feeling that you should do it there. So you don't necessarily have to plan it all out. But I was going to say that my approach tends to be that I start with a cool idea. So say, for instance, I was going to write a zombie book, and the next question would be, who is best suited? If it's a zombie book, who's the best person to deal with zombies? So they're either one of two extremes. They're either someone who is, say someone has a phobia about dead bodies, which would be one extreme, or the other extreme is someone who's completely comfortable with dead bodies, like someone who works in a morgue or something like that. A pathologist or whatever. One of those two extremes would be the best person to deal with the zombies, would be the best story about zombies, because either they'd be the hero because they don't care about dead bodies and they know how to deal with them, or they would be completely crippled by the zombie outbreak and would be no use to anyone. So it'd be them overcoming their fear. So that'd be the kind of way I'd start a story. And then after that, I think, okay, well, what's the journey of this person?
I'm all over the place. I think the artist in me has a lot in common with Dave's point of view. I know that's true because I always keep trying to go back to writing serials and bucking the 3-act structure for a strong character with an ongoing story. Like, immediately when I started reading Seven Stone, I started getting hungry for a serial project again. Unfortunately, a lot of people commercially reject that, and they want their little tidy packages rather than let me tell you an ongoing story. But the artist in me loves that because I love pulp and I love serial. And I think given naturally, I would go with developing the character or developing the scenario similar to what you said, and I would not be an outliner. I would be a pantser if left to my own devices. I think I forced myself and educated myself and pushed myself in a different direction so that now I'm either dead in the middle or maybe even leaning on outlining a little to that side. Just so that I feel safer when I'm doing it. But I think if I didn't do that, I think I would probably be a flaming pantser. Yeah, and as for character versus scenario, I think oddly, out of the three of us, we may have just found our spectrum, 1, 2, and 3, because I definitely can do the scenario and not even have the characters and have to go back and create some interesting characters. I built the Six-Dane Queen world long before I had any idea of any person, and I said, this is the world I want to write in. This is, elves are going to be like this, and trolls are going to be like this, and I had magic, started thinking of magic systems, and hadn't even come up with what any of the people would be like, and then went back and created characters to fit in it. So,
yeah, I mean, even when you say that, like the Dragons and Magic series, like I thought of, okay, what if RPG stats were real? My next step was, so then if RPG stats are real, what's the most extreme version of a character in that situation, which is someone who's just got all their points in the luck. So that's how Origin and Adventure and Sorcery came up. So yeah, that's just, I hadn't thought of it out loud like that, but yeah, that's definitely what I do. Is I have some idea which I think is cool, and then I think of a character that best brings out that idea, that kind of gives the most extreme example of one sort or another.
and Dave, your hero in Seven Stone, that hero was fully formed in your mind before any of the story was. I that's how I feel like when I read it. Like,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You didn't know so much as what he had for breakfast, and you had his whole moral and ethical inventory, and he came straight from your head, fully formed, before you even knew what color horse he was riding, for God's sakes.
Yeah, I had no idea what he was going to do when I started off. He said, I just this old, tired priest. Like Kane from the old Kung Fu television series, and Solomon Kane from Robert Howard, just glommed together into this guy who is fundamentally decent, but he's tired in his faith. People kind of hate him, and part of his job involves killing. And he's solving this problem that he doesn't understand. And then I went, well, he's not losing his faith, but he's losing his belief in the church, almost, that his faith is real, like the society that faith exists within. Well, what's he going to do when he's wandering the earth? And so I set him up, and then I thought, well, he's going to be very tired. He's going to need some support, because otherwise he's going to be a bit of a tedious character. So we need another perspective. And in Anessa, who turns up in the first episode, wasn't actually intended to be this massive major character who goes all the way. But I thought, well, someone who's actually innocent is potentially going to see the decent side of him, and not because they're naive as well, understand why he is such a problem to society. So they can think, well, he's a decent bloke, so we should save him. And that gave me two very different viewpoint characters on the same problem. They're both going to want to fix a great evil, but one of them's doing it because it's necessary, and one of them's doing it because they're all very heroic. But you see a great evil, that's what heroes do. You go out and you fix it. There's a wolf taking the sheep, you kill the wolf. There are sort of thieves in the forest, you drive them off. There is this unspeakable evil being birthed in the forests of the north, you go and fight it. And she just doesn't realize that there are two utterly different scales of threat to face. She just teaches it the same way. And so once I had those two characters, it gave me, well, how are they going to interact? How are they going to see the problem differently? And then gained a third character a little bit later to give me a new perspective. And I just swap episodes between the two viewpoints.
It's almost like sometimes some people outline their story, other people outline their characters. And even if you're not writing that down, just from what you just said, even if you're not putting it on paper, you're outlining your characters and you're building your characters. Very similar to, like, you could take those, it wouldn't be exact match, but I've seen character worksheets, and basically you're just doing a character worksheet in your head. You knew he was going to be a certain age. You knew he's going to be tired and world weary. You knew he was going to be heroic. You knew he wasn't going to be terribly likable. I mean, those are some very detailed things that you had planned out. So basically, you're outlining your characters and pantsing a little bit on your plot, and other people maybe are outlining their plot and pantsing on their characters a little bit. And there's a spectrum in between for all of us. But I wonder if we really looked at it, if it really came down to a lot of people are plotters, are plotters in one or the other. People who seem to think they're pantsers because they pants their plots have actually plotted one way or another their characters, and vice versa.
Yeah,
I think that's definitely, you're onto something definitely there.
Yeah.
And I wonder, so I've been reading recently editors, story editors, saying that they can tell who's going to be a fairly successful author by how much they're willing to change based on editorial feedback. And I wonder if you have pantsed your characters but outlined your plot, whether that's more malleable, that like you're more willing to ditch plot elements because you're not attached to them. Whereas if you've attached yourself to the characters, maybe you're less willing to change because you're saying, well, that's a real person. Because in your head, like, we know real people, but we don't know plot events. That's not a real thing out in real life.
Absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about, and it relates to every time I write something, I end up killing people that I don't want to kill on purpose. I make myself kill somebody. If I get to a certain point, I'm like, there's too many people that I like in this book. I need to kill somebody. Well, there's nobody I want to kill. Okay. I actually, at one point for 16 Queen, I actually had, I wrote down 6 names and assigned them a number 1 through 6 and just had my daughter pick a number and said, oh, somebody's going to die. And I had her pick, and I just said, well, I have to write so that they die. Just because somebody has to die, I'm getting too attached to these people. It's the only thing I've heard similar to it is when Stephen King had a bomb go off in The Stand. People have to die. Too attached. The story's going too well, and just people have to die. And I do that to avoid what you just said. That, like, this character is so important to me that the story can't continue without it. Well, then somebody's got to die. I guess it works better in 16 Queen because I had, I don't know, the 6 girls and then at least 4 or 5 other essential characters. So I think it would probably be a little problematic if you had only, I'll use Dave's 7 Stone again. I've only read the first part. If you pick a number, 1 or 2, it wouldn't, the book's pretty much over if you kill off one of the 2 people who are driving your story.
Yeah.
So,
but I don't know. I would say that, so I've gone through and deleted characters from my books if I feel like I'm not attached to any of them. So I think that the fewer characters, the better. And then when you're attached, when you kill someone, it actually matters. Like if Vanessa dies, that's going to mean a lot for the story. But if there was a 3rd character called Joe, and he just, made the stew and didn't take part in any of the battles, and Joe dies, no one's really going to give a shit. They're just going to go, oh, Joe's gone? Oh, never mind. Like, I think there does have to be, if you've got too many characters, you can kind of end up with a kind of a, who was that again? Oh, I don't remember. And yeah, I mean, I've killed off characters where I don't want to either, but that's usually where I get to the stage where I go, well, that guy has to be dead, because there's no, like, especially if it's about someone sacrificing themselves. Like if there's there's they're in a situation where they can't possibly get out of it, other than if this guy kills himself by running at the soldiers, then they'll have the distraction to get away, or whatever it happens to be.
Is that in your outline, though?
No, definitely not.
Okay.
In my outline, the baddies are stupid.
Okay.
That's always the case.
Because these deaths I'm talking about, no matter how detailed my outline, these deaths are not outlined. These are, I'm feeling too comfortable, everything's going too well. Okay, who's going to die? So these deaths I'm talking about are strictly pantsed. Like 80% of my deaths are pants deaths, regardless of whether I outlined. I would say that I'm a serial killer author, but I just read your last book, so and.
Yeah, I had to. So I did I forget what it's called, but I polled my readers, and said, "Hey, do you want a name in the new book, Fields of Dust?" And then had to warn them and say, "But he or she is going to be killed, so don't get offended when your character dies. But maybe you can see how far they last." Because the apocalypse doesn't go very well for most people.
What are your non-strict protagonist deaths end up being? Are they surprises to you, Dave?
It depends on the book. Sometimes I'll plan a death. I know someone is going to die at a particular point, because my rough idea of what the story's going to be involves people dying. But usually, because it's about, I like to write about characters, so I don't tend to have a vast portfolio of people. So I don't have major protagonists who I'm attached to 6 of them. So I need to sort of, kill one to make things work. I tend to have maybe 3, usually 2. So I've got more than one perspective on things, so I can swap back and forth. So I've got the opportunity to keep secrets from the reader by not having a protagonist witness it, and then having them do something without having a chance to get the other protagonist's perspective on things first. But generally, I'll use death as a sign that the world is lethal, or as a really cataclysmic thing, because people dying isn't a common thing. It should be something that really has meaning. This is fiction, after all. We're trying to write about a world that isn't this one, sort of as fantasy science fiction writers. And one of the things that's most true about the real world is that almost always death doesn't have meaning. And sometimes you die after a long, happy life. Sometimes you die doing something really meaningful. But the usual death in real life brings things to an end, with lots of stuff being unresolved. And it isn't a tidy end to things. So one of the things I like to do with death in stories is have it not be just T.S. Eliot's whimper, that actually there is a bang to it. It achieves something. So while I don't necessarily always get planned from the start, for someone to die, I'll be thinking of it before it happens. So I'll never be going, and I've got 5 characters who aren't essential for the plot, So I'll roll a dice and, oops, Fred get hit by a train.
Yeah, I mean, even George R. R. Martin, who kills just about everyone, no one drops dead from typhoid or anything. Like there is meaning to their deaths.
Yes.
I think, like, so the thing the distinction I would draw is I was watching a D&D thing on YouTube a couple of months ago, and this party gets to a dungeon, and there's an inscription, and the guy who's the mage floats up to read the inscription. He reads it out, and he fails his intelligence throw, so he mumbles it the wrong way, and then he fails his saving throw, and then his party member fails her saving throw, so he gets smashed by a trap and he's dead in the first 10 seconds of the dungeon. Like, so if you were going to put that in a book, it would have to be a humorous book. Like, it would have to be a funny situation, because otherwise, I don't know. Well, I guess you could say, okay, this is a really dangerous dungeon because our buddy just got smashed. But it'd be very difficult to do. It'd be more, you'd expect in a work of fiction, it'd be more after battling through the dungeon and, you know, being their mentor, that he gets killed saving them or something.
Oh, no, I'm laughing so hard because you just basically the humor fantasy that we were talking about pre-show that I told you popped into my head. Basically, that meaningless death and such in a D&D setting is what that whole concept was. Just like, oh, he's dead. Oh, he's dead. He's dead. Oh, crap. Oh, he's dead. And then and so I've actually had that thought in my head, like, wouldn't it be fun to write a book where, like, okay, are you ready? Yeah, we're ready. Oh, crap, there's an arrow in his eye. Okay, well, that couldn't possibly happen again. Oh, no, how did he die? You know, that would be, and at some point it would have to stop, but it would make for such an interesting beginning, like, you know, a stereotypical party of 6 and, like, you know, and at the end you've got, like, the level 0 halfling thief, the bard and the cleric are left, and, you know, the fighter, the magic user, the barbarian, and the monk all died horribly. So,
have you ever played a video game called Life Goes On?
No.
Where you play a series of knights who are sent on a quest by a king, and you can't get through the levels without killing them. So you throw your first knight onto the pit of spikes, so you then have a bridge to walk across his body to get to the next place. So that would be an interesting book. It would be difficult to write, but you'd have the village basically getting all these heroes and throwing them against the quest, and oh, well, they'll just fall into that trap and then have set it off, so the next party won't have to worry about the trap, but they'll get killed by the monster, but then the monster will be full of heroes, so won't eat the next party. And
well, you could make it a curse or a reincarnation. This poor bastard just keeps coming back, and a new corporeal body appears, like at a shrine or something, and he has to walk over his own corpse over the spikes, and then, like, to swing across, he has to use, like, the intestines of one of his corpses and to swing across the chasm. And how would that affect him mentally? Like, dear God, I just stepped on my own face, and now the spike is through my head. And
well, then you start getting into another game, Darkest Dungeon, which is a game where you have your characters and you send them down into these dungeons to fight monsters and traps and stuff like that, but they all start getting PTSD and horrible mental illnesses because they're constantly up against Cthulhu-like horrors. Anyway, we're kind of gone past our time, so we should probably wrap up.
All right.
Since we've started talking about computer games. So was there anything either of you wanted to add just at the end?
Don't think so, no.
No, it's all great. Hey, buy my book. Buy my book. Buy my book.
Yeah, buy it.
Buy everyone's books.
Buy my book.
Grant, thank you all very much for watching, and we shall see you next time.